All right. Hi, my name is Syd Slouka, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Colorado School of Mines. And today I'm going to be presenting on the characterization of respirable dust that's generated from full scale rock cutting tests in the laboratory, where we used radial picks with different stages of wear. So we just want to let you all know this research has been sponsored by NIOSH under the SmartBit project, and we're grateful for our numerous industry partners who have provided rock samples, cutting tools, and instrumentation. However, the views expressed here are those of the research team and do not necessarily represent the views of the sponsors or industry partners. So to begin, our research is focused around respirable dust, or particles that are 10 micrometers in aerodynamic diameter and smaller. And we're looking into these particles because we've seen an uptick in coal workers' pneumoconiosis cases in the US since the 2000s, and we want to try to figure out why that's happening to occupational workers. So there's a couple things that we've done. MSHA has figured out that the concentration and keeping concentration levels down is very important, and that knowing that there's silica in the dust is also very important because that's what scars our tissues and makes people sick. But what is the cause for this uptick in cases in the past 15, 20 years? And there's some ideas like it could be the wear of the pick, the location in the mine, is it the particle shape, is it the size distribution, is there silica encapsulated, is extra roof material being drilled? There's a lot of research going on in this realm, and so what we're going to do in this research is focus on the wear of the pick as it's striking the rock, and we're going to look at the particle shapes, the particle size distribution, and then also keep looking at the concentration of those particles. So for our methods, we have a full-scale linear cutting machine at the Earth Mechanics Institute, shown here on the left. And at the end of this green arrow is the inside of the air curtain, or basically the box we have that we keep all the particles generated inside of. So when we're cutting the rock and rock gets put into little pieces, it gets thrown into the air and it's kept inside that curtain, which is shown in the middle picture here, the inside of the curtain, where we have cyclones installed to collect the dust particles. And then on the far right are three picks, the radial picks that we use in our testing, with the new on the left and then a moderately worn in the middle and fully worn on the right, where these two worn picks were used in industry in an actual mine, and they were kind enough to give us the picks where they took it off at the very end of a rotation and they took one off in the middle of a rotation for us. So to collect the dust particles, we had 4 cyclones installed in that dust curtain, and these were Dort Oliver nylon cyclones with a cut point of 4 micrometers less. So we had a PVC filter and PC filters installed into those, or with those cyclones, in order to collect the particles and then analyze them. We also had a shop vac to suck up the particles that were left on the surface of the rock after each cut, because we wanted to look at those as well, because even though that material is heavier, in downstream operations, when that material is moved down conveyor belts and dropped at different points, those particles can be reintroduced into the air and breathed in again. So once we collected the particles, we needed to analyze them. So we used the NIOSH Manual of Analytical Methods 0600 and 7500 to find the concentration and mineralogy. We used laser diffraction to find particle size distributions, and we used a field emission scanning electron microscope to collect images, and then we had a image processing program to look at the shapes and make calculations on like aspect ratio and roundness of the particles. So for our results, looking at this NIOSH, the NAMAM standard 0600, we find that the moderate pick generated the most amount of dust here, or like the largest concentration for the time ran. And the lowest was the new pick. For the particle shapes, we looked at aspect ratio and roundness. And then the column on the left shows the aspect ratio, where green is the new pick, yellow is the moderate pick, and then red is the worn pick, and the different distributions of the aspect ratios. And then the right column shows the roundness for those shapes. And if we look at the shapes of these histograms, we can see that the moderate pick generated very different shaped particles compared to the new and the worn pick. So what we ended up doing is performing a KS statistical test on the distributions of data with a p-value of 0.05, that as the threshold to test the distribution differences. And there's strong evidence that the moderate pick's distribution of particle shapes are in fact different from the new and the worn, and that the new and the worn particle shapes are similar between those. So we also looked at the size distribution. We performed another KS test on these distributions of data, and with another p-value of 0.05 as the threshold, and it has strong evidence, or suggests strong evidence, that these three distributions are very similar in their size distributions. So we also looked at that fine material, or the little particles that were left on the surface of the rock block, and we looked at the distribution of sizes there with aerodynamic diameter. And we can see from this graph, with them all plotted on top of each other, that it seems like the new pick generated a little bit more particle sizes, around 10 micrometers in aerodynamic diameter, and the moderately pick generated a lower amount, with the moderately pick having more particles in the larger, about 100 micrometers across in aerodynamic diameter. So what does all this mean? Throwing a lot out there. There's no concrete solutions, or there's no concrete evidence here that says one pick generates dust that's more dangerous than the other. This is just the first round of tests that we did on a potash rock block to look at the distributions and look at the shapes of particles. So we can't make any suggestions from the results that we have obtained here, but we're starting to get an idea of maybe like what is more dangerous and what isn't. The other hard part here is that all these different characterizations, like concentration, aspect ratio, and size distribution, they all have very complicated interactions with each other as people inhale them. And we don't know how those interactions between the characteristics affect people and how they make people sick. So if we really just look at one characterization at a time, we can kind of start to think about which pick might be most dangerous or like harmful to people. For example, if we look at concentration, we could say maybe the moderate pick is the most dangerous pick because it generates the highest concentration of dust, potentially. Maybe that's dangerous. If we look at the aspect ratio roundness, the moderate pick generated particles that had really oblong or long shapes, which could potentially be more dangerous for people. If we look at those airborne respirable particles, the size distribution of those, maybe the most dangerous pick would be the new one because it favored smaller particle sizes, and maybe smaller particles are more dangerous for people. And then looking at the size distribution of the fines, maybe that new pick is most dangerous because it did generate particles, again, of a smaller size distribution. So although we can't make solid conclusions here, we're kind of getting an idea of maybe the characteristics of these dusts, and if other research happens on how these characteristics affect people, we can get a better idea of which picks generate the most dangerous dust in the future. So we also were kind of thinking, like, why did the moderate pick generate different data from the other two? And so we're starting to look into that, and this is one little part that we've done where we've measured down from the tip of the pick and found that the moderately worn pick has the most surface area in contact with the rock. So that's a potential of why it's generating different characteristics of dust, but we're still looking into that. So thank you all for watching and listening to this research, and I guess we'll take some questions now. Thank you.